Welcome back, Kings of War fans, to a very special update where we're going to take a look at what's happening in the world of Winged Hussar Publishing. If you don't know who Winged Hussar are, then allow me to educate you. They are the publishing company responsible for taking forward the world of Panathor in fiction. If you're a lover of background and the general fluff of the Kings of War universe, your eyes should be on Winged Hussar for what's coming up. So the plan with this video is I'm going to try and geographically place these books on the map of Panathor, which is actually a lot harder than it sounds. I'm also going to try and place them in time. Now, there is a very fancy timeline being produced for the Kings of War RPG, and I asked for it for this video, and I haven't been sent it. So instead, I've done this one in MS Paint, which I think you agree is probably of a comparable quality. Anyway, as you can see here are the major kind of events on the history of Panathor. So at the beginning of time, and then there's the God War, which is when, the Fenoulian mirror shattered. And if you've no idea about the history of Panathor, then I'm very sorry, you have to go and read the rulebook. Or watch Page Neo's recent video. If you look for Newbie Dice, he's got a 1-hour explanation of the history of Panathor. Or look at one of the Wikipedia entries on fandom. Or, you know what, just text me. Yeah, I'll give you my number later. So, God War, which is when the Fenoulian mirror shattered and all the gods were separated into their shining ones and wicked ones. Then you've got the actions, the dotted line there, because obviously that's a very, very long period of time. Then we're into the actions of Edge of the Abyss, which is when all that stuff happened and the abyss widened and then it was flooded. Then we've got 3rd edition, which is about 10 years after that, and then we've got the events of Halpi's Rift. That's the timeline. I'm going to put the books on there. I spent too long talking about it. Let's look at the books. So I'm going to start off by quickly covering the books that are already out, the first of which is the anthology Edge of the Abyss, which takes place right about here, around the time of the events of Edge of the Abyss, hence the name. And of course on the map it tends to sit around the Rift. The stories tend to deal with Rift-related subjects, by and large, and it's there for you to go and look at. So, Edge of the Abyss came out in 2018. Winged Hussar's first Kings of War novel proper came out a year later in 2019 in the form of Steps to Deliverance by Mark Barber. Steps to Deliverance follows a force of Basalian paladins, that's how you're supposed to say it now, and a variety of other heroes as they struggle against their arch enemies, the Abyssals. It's a jolly good read and a great start to the library of books taking place, I'm kind of guessing prior to or shortly after the events of Edge of the Abyss. It's really not all that important. Plus, it's located in the Mantica heartland, in and around the mountains between Bassalia and the Abyssal Plains. The most recent release is Ben Stoddard's Drowned Secrets. Ben is a Kings of War player who, having been published in the Edge of Abyss anthology, wrote his first book focusing around a revenge story from the point of view of a pair of Neureticans from the Trident Realm grappling with the darker side of Bassalia, along with a smattering of forces of nature, dwarves, undead, so on and so forth. Given we're in 3rd edition, I'm going to charitably wang this one post-3rd and pre-Halpi's Rift, because why the hell not? And geographically, we're down here in the Abkhazla Mountains, being the outer reaches of the Bassalian Empire. Next to be released, in a matter of days from the release of this video, in fact, is Mark Barber's second novel for Winged Hussar, that being Pious, a tie-in to the shortly to be released Kings of War Armada game. Boats, 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 boats. Mark's making the most of his love for Mantic's flagship army. Yeah, flagship. Get it? It's boats. Anyway, the book follows a disillusioned Bassalian lieutenant who's drawn into a tense battle of wits and wills with a self-styled orc admiral Gurak around the infant sea in the islands south of the Bassalian mainland, which is a handy point for me to stick a pin in the map, right about here. I'm going to make a wild guess that it's a 3rd edition book and put it into dock next to Drowned Secrets. Yeah, I better move on before I make any more nautical puns. Boats, boats. Next up is Nature's Night, which was originally conceived by Mark DeSantis, as shown by this delightful preview cover. However, thanks to narrative changes in version 3, it's now a collaborative novel, whereby Mark Barber, Ben Stoddard, James Dunbar and Brandon Rossbond, who is the boss of Winged Hussar, are all chipping in sections of the story. It's set just 2 years after the Edge of the Abyss, which means it needs to shove in about here, and follows a champion of the Green Lady coming to terms with his past while defending the borders of the Forests of Galahir, which is down here, against the encroachment of the terrifying Night Stalkers. Lovely. Now we're into the stuff you might not have heard of where lovely covers don't officially exist yet. This is Claws on the Plain by James Dunbar. I'd like to tell you more about him, but when I googled him I only found the British philosopher who died in 1798. If it's him, I'm seriously impressed. Claws on the Plain is set after Edge of the Abyss, which means it's going here. And it deals with ogre mercenaries and the kingdoms of men bordering the Ardavikian plain, where a giant border wall has been constructed by the successor kingdoms, keeping the young kingdoms of the plain from their homelands. following a mercenary general in his search for the treasures of Primo Vantor against the backdrop of a battle for power. Lush. The next release is called The Battle of Dawn Keep by Tom Holtby, who a swift Google tells me may well be another new author. Tom's book follows the journey of an elf maiden from the Eastern Kindred who teams up with an ogre and his red goblin servant to travel to the Ardovician plains. However, they get waylaid when they hear of an enterprising elven prince whose castle, Dawn Keep, represents a reflowering of elven influence in northern Mantica. I reckon it's probably here-ish, given that it's halfway between the lands of the Eastern Kindred and the Mammoth Steppes, and at this point I'm not even bothering with the timeline because your guess is as good as mine. However, we will revisit it briefly for one more book, which is next on our release list, currently slated for late spring 2021. C.L. Werner, yes, that C.L. Werner of Black Library fame, is joining the Kings of War universe, writing a novel called Rise of the Celestians. There's no cover for that yet, so I'm using this amazing picture I nicked out of the rulebook, but the reason I'm using the timeline is because this book, the first of a series of 3, is set back here and tells the story of the God War, kind of like, the Silmarillion to the current storyline Lord of the Rings, but, hopefully significantly more readable. And with that, we say goodbye to the timeline, but to give us some sense of continuity, we'll stick with the map. The next novel is called Faith Aligned and sees Mark Barber pick up the story of Orion from Steps to Deliverance for a lovely sequel. I'm going to assume it's somewhere near the location of the first book, but it's worth noting that Steps was so popular that Mark is currently working on the storyline for the 3rd and 4th book in the series. So cool! Next up is another name you might know if you've been paying attention to upcoming Kings of War releases. Shadows and Infamy is slated to be written by Mark Langworthy, who is the guy behind the Kings of War RPG. This book ties directly into the RPG and the upcoming League of Infamy game, dealing with the nefarious goings-on of that most secretive group of backstabbing bastards. As to where it's set, I couldn't tell you, so it can go up there in the, corner with its celestial buddy. Now we're into 2022, so let's open a small sweepstake as to how many of these books make their release date. If you guess them all right, you win a packet of salt and vinegar crisps. Frozen Rage is to be written by Gordon Jones and is the first of 3 dwarf-themed books. This one set up in the frozen north of the Northern Alliance. And just to be 100% clear, I've completely made that cover up. It's not even close to official. Next we have a book called The Cost of Power by Tom Fern. It's a story set around the Euhedral Library, and if you're wondering what that is, so am I. I can only find one reference to it in the rulebook, but I do know it's right here in the Successor Kingdoms. It's even on the map. Expect a story featuring elves, the Kings of Men, and some Rapkin. That's all I've got. That's all I got. I made that cover up too. Tom Fern is clearly going to be busy because he's also up for Mask, which is a story specifically requested by Mantic to tell the story of Morgoth the Faceless. This is pretty exciting, and I'm told you can expect some darker fiction as you might expect for the subject matter. I again googled Tom, and apparently he's an Everton goalkeeper that died in 1966, which is kind of appropriate for an undead author. At this point, the map is getting less useful because I don't know where anything is set, but we'll plough onwards. Next is a pair of books that Ben Stoddard is working on. The first is a sequel to Drowned Secrets, which is called In the Wake of the Leviathan. However, that's on the back burner because he's now working on the snappily named Untitled Ben Dwarf book. Again, this is a Mantic request that will put in motion big events for the dwarves. It will flesh out the lore of the faction and expand on the story of some big named characters such as Haeneas and Bannock. Apparently the first in a trilogy. That's all very well, but perhaps the most exciting author to join Mantic's ranks, for me that is Unplugged radio host and all-round amazing bloke Mike Rossi. He rounds off the trilogy of dwarf books we've got on our listing with an action-packed dwarf versus abyssal dwarf narrative called Honour's Price. If it's anything as entertaining to read as Mike is entertaining to listen to, it should be bloody amazing. Penultimately, it's another familiar face to those who frequent Kings of War related community channels. Kindred Adrift is by Riley Nadeau, who you more likely recognise under the moniker Visibly Riley. Riley's book is expected towards the end of 2022 and is another high seas novel, akin to the spirit of Pius, and centres around a young elf who is travelling the seas with 2 salamander companions. I'm going to whack it over here, for no other reason than because Waterdeep is cool. Last on the list, but definitely not least, is Mantic's own Rob Berman. The Lord of Goblins is working on the appropriately titled The Goblin King. And if you want to hear more about that, why not listen to the recent Countercharge episode with Rob where he talks all about it. So that's your lot, and talk about a lot. Here's the list of release dates. If everything goes to plan, you better clear a sizable section of your bookshelf, because Mantic's library is going to be bursting with more fluff than the top prize at a coconut shy. Hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll try to keep up with Winged Hussar's output as time goes on. Toodaloo!